Yeah. I had some questions for you, Callie, specifically about one of your most recent podcasts, and it was the one on, because it bears on parenting, the sudden onset gender dysphoria thing. And I want to ask about it especially because
I'm so excited.
I have a parent friend who has actually said things that are kind of like that because her child has identified with a non-normative group. And she's like, they're all that. And I'm like, okay, confirmation bias. And the person who was on your show, I'm sorry, I forget his name.
Zinnia Jones, her name.
Her name. I am so sorry. Zinnia Jones was just as passionate about science as I am. You had better do the science right.
Oh my God, Zinnia is amazing. Like, I love her so much.
Yeah, I loved what she had to say. It was spot on. The people you sample matter. Asking the parents, that's, why don't I ask the person walking down the street what their opinion is on it? They don't know anything. They're not experiencing it. And the obvious, I'm going to just talk all over. I should be quiet and listen to Callie. What do you have to say?
Well, so for folks who aren't familiar with the term, rapid onset dysphoria is this phrase that came out of these very specifically anti-trans websites a few years ago, and it describes this phenomenon where mostly kids who were assigned female at birth are suddenly, in air quotes, expressing a transgender identity. So either expressing themselves as non-binary or expressing themselves as trans men. And right around puberty, this seems to come completely out of nowhere. And these kids are asking for hormones and I guess, sometimes surgeries. And there's this group of parents that are like, well, the internet must be to blame. Or, they've been using social media a lot more lately. And it's like causation versus correlation. It's like one of the most classic examples.
Cornerstone.
So they've started hanging out with a group of friends who are trans, and all of a sudden they're trans.
It's contagious.
That's exactly it, right?
God.
Friggin' frog's gay.
Yeah, this stupid hurts. Oh my gosh.
The line that I used in the podcast, and I think it's a very accurate representation, is it's literally the satanic panic for gender.
Right.
Like, it's fear mongering.
Reefer madness.
And so like obviously we're just leaving the fact of the closet out of everything. Like kids understand how dangerous their parents can be to them, so they don't tell them. It's not that it's sudden, it's just that you're suddenly finding out.
Right.
Probably because your kid's not identified you as a safe person to talk to.
Yep.
And also like we've apparently forgotten that kids tend to run in social groups with people they have things in common with. And and we're
that's
also,
what I was going to say too. Is of course obvious. Of course they're going to come out at the same time if they are comfortable with each other and they have each other to lean on and support one another.
Yep.
Why would they not come out?
Well,
we were talking about before.
And the so-called data that this relies on is self-reporting from parents. So not only does this rely on the parents' perception of their child's gender identity being accurate, which it obviously is not in many cases, it also relies on these parents' perceptions of other kids' identities becoming trans suddenly. So, I mean, the best that I can think, and I don't know this, in fairness, I don't know this to be true, but what the impression that I get is basically it's like, oh, so this person that I've always known as a girl cut their hair short, dyed it green, and wears boys' clothes. Oh, they're probably trans. They're probably calling themselves trans now because that's what it means to some of these people, which is outlandish. And so like, and what's hard is like, it's, when we talk about it in these terms, I mean, it's silly, right? Like it is absolutely silly, but it's really not silly because this is really informing the way that some parents are dealing with their trans kids. And I mean, that like leads very directly to dead kids, to be totally blunt about it. And that's terrifying. And it's, it has the veneer of science. I mean, even like the term rapid onset gender dysphoria, it sounds very sciencey, right? So like it has the veneer of legitimacy. But it's literally a researcher going specifically to anti-trans websites to poll parents on these websites forums about their perceptions of their kids. Like, could you have a more tainted data set than that?
Bias sampling.
Let's leave ideology completely out of the equation for a second and just talk about what a terrible idea that is from a science point of view. And her defense is that it's an initial study, right? It's just we definitely need more data, but like anyone.
How about any data at all?
Right.
Nothing of what you collected is worth anything.
Any person who knows anything about this conversation knows exactly what the consequences of this kind of stuff is going to be. Yeah. And so, like, I mean, if you go out and you find that data in a legitimate way and it seems to be true, okay, let's go ahead and report it. But you also have to understand that, first of all, you're probably wrong because the data we actually have does not support your position. But if you were to somehow magically go out and find this data that contradicts basically everything we know about the well-being of trans people who are affirmed in their whatever their transition goals are, which don't always include hormones and surgery, by the by, that's going to have some pretty serious consequences for people, and that has to be handled super responsibly, and it was not in this case. And she just sort of equivocated. Well, I'm not making these statements. Well, you kind of are. You kind of are. You can't hide behind. Well,
and it's fueling a fire for the bigots. All it does is then, people who aren't science literate will see those statistics and go, oh my God, I guess that's right then because it's science, right? Mm-hmm. But they don't know. Yeah. And so it's like, it just muddies the water for everything.
Yeah. When it comes to science, one of the things that I was taught all through learning how to do science is you can ask a question and you'll always get an answer, but you have to make sure you're asking the right question. And the question they accidentally asked, or maybe not so accidentally, was how to show how easy it is to not pay attention to your kid, to not care about what your kid is going through, and to parent really poorly. It was all sorts of how to not do it, basically, is what they showed to me.
Well, and the other thing, too, about this specific story, and this is something I actually didn't know until I talked to Zinnia about it, because I'd done a bunch of reading, and I guess I had missed this, is that the way the journal that this study was published in works is basically like, we get the data, we put it out there for sort of community review, and we kind of see what happens, right? And I'm not an academic, so I can't really comment on the wisdom of that methodology, but like, this process worked out exactly the way that it was supposed to. They put the study out, a whole lot of questions were raised, and they were like, well, okay, we're going to put it under review, which to the right-wing media looked like whoa, they're censoring science for their left-wing agenda. But it's like, no, this journal literally operates this way. We get the data out as fast as we can, and then it undergoes this community peer review process, and we act accordingly. So like, according to the way those processes worked, the science worked exactly as it should have.
Yes. But they don't understand that. It's another.
They don't want to. They don't care.
Yeah. Peer reviewed means peer reviewed by people who actually know about how to do science and the topic at whatever they're studying. So if they say, we need to take another look at it, we should be taking another look at it.
And part of the fear mongering is, and this is like, so for a parent who is literally like, oh my gosh, I just found out my kid is trans and I have no idea what this means. Yeah. There are some legitimate fears that a parent could have, right? I don't want to give my kid hormones and give my kid surgery because what if they change their mind? Because kids do that, right? And so like, there's this myth of desistance that so many kids that identify as trans end up changing their minds. Which I could talk a very long time about that, but that's not really what the data tells us. But first of all, like from up to about age 16, the only like affirming your trans kid literally means like, oh, you want to get a haircut? Cool. Oh, you want to wear different clothes? Cool. You want us to call you a different name and different pronouns? Cool. Like there is nothing permanently damaging about any of those steps if your kid decides to change their mind, right? Mm-hmm. There is nothing that is going to affect the rest of your kid's life about doing that, right? And then after super intensive review by teams of psychologists and medical practitioners, you might start puberty blockers. And it's
That's
very
what
important.
I was going to say too, is those don't like permanently affect the body as well. Isn't that right?
Correct. It literally delays puberty.
People are so up in arms about it. They can't stand that there are parents who would allow their children to, they see it as giving them like medically transitioning, but if it's going to help them in the long run, I can't.
Yeah, well, and in the rare case where this kid changes their mind and says, "Oh, actually, you know what? I just want to keep going the direction that I was going." You go off puberty blockers. You may be a little bit behind the rest of your peers, but you develop just as you would have otherwise, just on a little bit of a delay. And then, eventually 16, 17, 18, then they can start cross-sex hormone therapy. So, testosterone for assigned female at birth folks, and estrogen for assigned male at birth folks, or whatever hormone combination works, and then eventually at 18 or whatever, surgery. But like, none of this happens without intensive review by medical professionals, right? So this is not just something like, oh, my kid decides they want to have different genitals, let's get them surgery. Like, people act like that's what happens, right? That is not what happens. That's not what happens for adults. It's not what happens for adults. Right. Like, adults have to go through a monumental gatekeeping process to get it, let alone kids.
Yeah. I hear the argument all the time too, like, oh, this person lets their son dress up in, girls' clothes, and how does he even know what he wants at that age? Why would they enable him when he doesn't even know what he wants? It's like,
are you kidding me?
Clearly he knows what he wants. Yeah. It doesn't matter, and he's happy and he's comfortable.
You figure it out by trying it out. And you see, like, that, it absolutely blows my mind that people freak out so much about that. Like, like, let your kid, like, first of all, why do clothes have to have a gender? Like, in our society, they do. It's silly. Like, so we can talk about that. But like, if your son wants to wear a dress, like, first of all, he can still wear a dress and be your son and be a boy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like, if there's more to the story, okay, I'm still working on finding the problem.
Right. We have about 2 minutes before we need to wind things up. Because this is a parenting show, I would like for anybody who wants to say one more thing about what we can do as parents to help any kiddo, not just ours, be happier and healthier if they have any non-conforming thing. I don't care what it is.
Just love them. I just don't. It's crazy to me that this is even a conversation that needs to be had, because I think it was like Lisa said, my kid could probably commit murder and I would still be like, oh, it's fine, he didn't mean it. Or, I just have such an overwhelming unconditional love for my son that I can't imagine not having that,
Okay, explain it to us like you're explaining it to my biological mother.
Yeah. God.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
Go there. Yeah. The person who lacks empathy. Try that. Yeah. So you need some pointers. Start with, don't say anything stupid.
Definitely.
I mean,
and believe your kids, I think, too. Like, believe them when they say that they feel a certain way. And, something that we do in my house is he's just learning pronouns for, like, the cats and my friends and stuff. And so I reinforce pronouns when I know somebody's pronouns. But when it comes to him, if he'll say, like, am I he or she? And I'll tell him, you could be either one. It doesn't matter. What do you think? And he'll say every time it's he. And so I'm like, okay. But if tomorrow he decided he wanted me to refer to him as she, I would. And then if the day after that he wanted to go back to he, I would. What's the issue? I don't get it.
Yeah, well, and for people who don't want to do that, I think you lay out a very stark dichotomy. Like, if your kid tells you they're gay, you have two options. You can accept your kid and maintain your relationship. You can not accept your kid and have an antagonistic relationship at best, or end up with no relationship with your kid. Those are your choices.
Definitely, yeah.
Figure yourself out.
Yeah, and I think that for me, like, I had to come out to my parents, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times in my whole adolescence, because each time they'd say, no, you're not, and then sweep it under the rug. And then I would come out again, no, you're not, sweep it under the rug. And we wouldn't talk about it. It was just this thing where they were like, yeah, whatever. And then they were shocked when at 21 I brought home my first long-term girlfriend. And it was like, I've been preparing you the best I could.
Denial is just unreal.
And it hurts as a child to not be taken seriously.
Right.
To be belittled like that and be told you don't know what's best for you. You don't know what you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mandisa? Any thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I would. I'm sorry, I was talking to my sons. They're about to go for their testing for Taekwondo again. So
right on.
Nice.
In and out again.
Yeah.
But I would absolutely agree with that. Listening to your children and also reflecting on I may have talked about this on the last time I was on the show, is that as parents, we cannot be afraid to be wrong. And to, again, the learning process is lifelong. And if you say something, to your child and they tell you that it's hurtful, acknowledge it and apologize. Show the empathy that you want others to show for them. Because unfortunately, there tends to be a lot of do as I say and not as I do. And I try to discourage that for myself and for my children. And I think that's probably like the best thing that I've learned to do. It actually takes a lot of weight off as well. That I found is that it makes the process not necessarily easier, but it definitely allows the child to continue to develop their process and process their emotions and such. So I found that that's been very helpful.
Right on. So we need to read the final chapter of the Noah's Ark book. Before I do that, I want to say one more time, acceptance is not predicated on understanding. Oh, yeah. I love that. Oh, my gosh.